The cleaning cart squeaked as Tom pushed it down corridor 14B, the sound echoing off the metal walls of Imperial Station 7. It was 3 in the morning ship time and the place was dead quiet. Just the way he liked it. After 20 years of night shifts, Tom had learned to appreciate the peace. No dragon officers barking orders, no foot traffic, just him and his mop bucket. Tom was 52 years old, with gray creeping into his brown hair and permanent lines around his eyes from squinting at grimy floors. He'd taken this job fresh off Earth, young and hopeful. Back then he dreamed of adventure among the stars. Now he just wanted to finish his shift and catch a few hours of sleep before his daughter's video call. She was graduating college next month. First in the family. That thought made him smile as he hummed an old Earth tune. The dragons who ran this station barely noticed him. To them he was just part of the furniture. Another human doing the jobs they considered beneath their dignity. Tom didn't mind anymore. He'd made his peace with being invisible. It was safer that way. The dragons had rules, lots of them, and humans who drew attention usually regretted it. He was halfway through mopping the floor near the waste disposal section when he heard something odd. Tom stopped humming and tilted his head. There it was again. A soft sound almost like crying. But that didn't make sense. This section was always empty at night. The disposal chutes were automated, dumping trash into the incinerator 3 levels down. Tom set down his mop and walked toward the sound. His boots clicked against the clean floor he'd just finished. The noise was coming from inside the waste chute itself. He pressed his ear against the cold metal panel. Definitely crying. Or whimpering. Something alive was in there. His first thought was that some poor maintenance rat had gotten stuck. The station had problems with those. But as he carefully opened the access panel, his breath caught in his throat. This was no rat. 2 eyes stared back at him from the darkness. Golden eyes that seemed to glow with their own light. They were filled with such fear and pain that Tom felt his chest tighten. He knew those eyes. Everyone who worked on a dragon station knew those eyes. "Oh no," Tom whispered. "What are you doing in there, little one?" He reached into his cart and grabbed his flashlight. The beam illuminated the chute's interior, and Tom's worst fears were confirmed. A dragon hatchling. It was tiny, no bigger than a house cat, curled up among the garbage and waste. Its scales should have been shining silver or gold, but they looked dull and gray, covered in grime. The little dragon was shaking, its small body racked with tremors. Tom had seen hatchlings before, but always from a distance. Dragon young were kept in special nurseries, tended by their own kind. Humans weren't allowed near them. It was one of the strictest rules on the station. So what was this one doing in a trash chute? Then Tom remembered something he'd overheard last week. 2 dragon officers talking in the corridor while he mopped. They'd been laughing about a runt in the new clutch. "Too small to survive," one had said. "Better to dispose of it now than waste resources." Tom had pretended not to hear. You learned to do that when you were human on a dragon station. His hands shook as he reached into the chute. The hatchling could bite him. Even baby dragons had sharp teeth. But those golden eyes just watched him, too weak to even pull away. Tom's fingers closed gently around the small body, and he carefully lifted the creature out. The hatchling weighed almost nothing. Tom could feel every bone through its skin. When was the last time it had eaten? Days. Weeks. The little dragon made a pitiful sound and collapsed against his chest, its tiny claws gripping his uniform. Tom felt something break inside him. His daughter used to hold on to him like that when she was scared. "It's okay," he murmured, cradling the hatchling carefully. "I've got you." Tom glanced up and down the corridor. Still empty. The security cameras were always recording, but whoever checked the footage from the waste disposal area? Nobody, that's who. He looked down at the trembling creature in his arms. Those golden eyes met his and Tom saw something there. Intelligence. Understanding. This wasn't just an animal. This was a child. A terrified, starving child that someone had thrown away like garbage. Tom made a decision. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his dinner. Just a simple sandwich that his neighbor Betty had made for him. Ham and cheese, nothing fancy. He tore off a piece of the meat with shaking hands and held it out. The hatchling's eyes went wide. It snatched the meat from his fingers and swallowed it in one gulp. Then it looked up at him with such desperate hope that Tom had to blink back tears. He fed it another piece, then another, until half the sandwich was gone. The little dragon's scales already looked a bit brighter. "Guess you're coming with me," Tom said softly, tucking the hatchling inside his jacket where it would be warm and hidden. Above him, mounted in the corner of the ceiling, a security camera's red light blinked steadily, recording everything. But Tom didn't look up. He was too busy feeling the small heartbeat against his chest and wondering what he'd just gotten himself into. 3 weeks had changed everything. Tom still couldn't quite believe it himself. The tiny, trembling creature he'd found in the waste chute was now a healthy, energetic little dragon that he'd named Spark. The name just fit. Those golden eyes had a spark of life in them now, a brightness that grew stronger each day. Spark's scales had transformed from dull gray to a beautiful silver blue that caught the light whenever the hatchling moved. The little dragon had doubled in size, now as big as a medium-sized dog, and its wings were starting to develop properly. Tom watched in amazement as Spark practiced flapping them, managing to hover a few inches off the ground before tumbling down with an adorable squeak. "You're not defective at all, are you?" Tom whispered one night, sitting on an overturned bucket in the storage closet he'd converted into a hidden sanctuary. Spark was curled up in a nest made from clean towels Tom had borrowed from the station's laundry. The little dragon's chest rose and fell peacefully, completely trusting and content. Tom had moved an old space heater into the closet because he'd noticed Spark liked warmth. He'd also brought in a small lamp that gave off a soft glow, making the cramped space feel almost cozy. This closet, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the maintenance level, had become their secret world. The whole thing would have been impossible to hide if Tom had been alone. But he wasn't. By the second week, his secret had gotten out to 2 other people. Jake had discovered them first. The young maintenance worker, barely 25, had been looking for cleaning supplies and walked right in on Tom feeding Spark. Tom's heart had nearly stopped. He'd stood there frozen, waiting for Jake to run and report him. Instead, Jake had stared at Spark for a long moment, then quietly closed the door behind him. "That's a dragon baby," Jake had said, stating the obvious. "Yes," Tom had replied, his voice steady despite his fear. "They threw it away, didn't they? I heard the officers talking about a runt last month." Tom had just nodded. Jake had looked at Spark, then at Tom, then back at Spark. Finally, he'd said, "What does it eat?" That's how Tom knew Jake was okay. He wasn't asking whether to keep Spark. He was asking how to help. Rachel had found out a few days later. The cafeteria worker was sharp. She'd noticed Tom taking extra food, noticed him spending time near the old storage area, noticed the way he seemed distracted lately. Rachel was in her 40s with 3 kids back on Earth, and she had that mom instinct that could sniff out secrets from a mile away. She'd cornered Tom one evening and simply said, "Show me." When she saw Spark, Rachel had actually started crying. "Oh honey," she'd said, and Tom wasn't sure if she was talking to him or the dragon. "You've been feeding it your own meals, haven't you?" Tom had shrugged. "I can skip a few dinners." Rachel had smacked his arm. "Idiot. You're too skinny already." The next day, she'd started bringing extra food from the cafeteria. Chicken scraps that would have been thrown out anyway. Vegetables that were slightly past their prime. Nothing that would be missed, but everything that Spark needed. Now the 3 of them had fallen into a routine. Jake would stop by in the mornings before his shift with whatever he could sneak from the supply room. Rachel came by during her lunch break with food. And Tom spent every night with Spark, cleaning the closet, playing with the hatchling, and teaching it simple things. "Brought some chicken from the cafeteria," Jake said, slipping through the door one evening. His pockets bulged with wrapped packages. "How's our little friend?" Spark's head popped up immediately. The dragon had learned to recognize Jake's voice. It chirped happily, a sound like wind chimes that made all 3 humans smile every time they heard it. "Getting bigger every day," Tom said proudly as Spark bounded over to Jake, nearly knocking the young man down with enthusiasm. Rachel arrived a few minutes later, looking worried. She always looked worried these days. "Tom, you know this can't stay secret forever," she said, not for the first time. "If the dragons find out what you've done." "I know," Tom interrupted, his voice harder than he intended. He softened it. "I know, Rachel. But I couldn't just let Spark die. What was I supposed to do?" "I'm not saying you were wrong," Rachel said gently. "I'm saying we need to be prepared for what happens when they find out. Because they will find out. They always do." Jake nodded, his young face serious. "She's right, Tom. We need a plan." But they didn't know that it was already too late for plans. They didn't know that someone had already found out. Someone important. Commander Dravik was an old dragon, one of the lower nobles who served in the station's security division. His scales were fading from red to rust-colored with age, and his wings had scars from battles fought decades ago. He'd been reviewing security footage as part of his regular duties when he'd seen something that made him stop and replay the recording. A human janitor pulling a dragon hatchling from a waste chute. Feeding it. Caring for it. The old dragon had watched the footage 3 times, feeling something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. It troubled him deeply. It also moved him profoundly. Dravik had tried to delete the footage. He'd actually tried. But it had already been flagged by the automated systems and copied to the main security database. Copied and sent upward through the chain of command. All the way up to the Imperial Court itself. That evening, Dravik made his way down to the maintenance level. He knew exactly where the human had hidden the hatchling. He'd been watching for 3 weeks, saying nothing, hoping somehow it could continue. But hope wasn't enough anymore. He found the storage closet and knocked gently on the door with one massive claw. Inside, Tom heard the knock and felt his blood turn to ice. That wasn't Jake's knock. That wasn't Rachel's knock. He stood up slowly and positioned himself between the door and Spark, who sensed the tension and pressed against Tom's legs. The door opened. Commander Dravik had to duck his massive head to look inside the small closet. His ancient eyes found Tom first, then moved to Spark. "Commander, Tom started, his voice shaking. "The footage has reached the Imperial Court," Dravik said quietly, his deep voice filled with something Tom couldn't quite identify. "Sadness? Regret? The Emperor himself is coming. I'm sorry, human. I tried to delete it, but it was too late." Tom's legs nearly gave out. "The Emperor. Coming here. For him." He looked down at Spark, who looked back up at him with those trusting golden eyes, and Tom realized that trying to save one life might have just cost him his own. The entire station shook when Emperor Theron's ship docked. Tom was in his quarters trying to get a few hours of sleep when the first impact hit. His coffee mug fell off the table and shattered on the floor. The walls vibrated with a deep, resonating clang that seemed to go on forever. Every human on the station knew what that sound meant. The Emperor had arrived. Tom's hands trembled as he put on his cleanest uniform. What was the point? He was probably going to die today. But somehow, putting on clean clothes made him feel a little more ready to face whatever was coming. He thought about calling his daughter on Earth one last time, but what would he say? "Hey honey, Dad's about to be executed by a dragon emperor for breaking about 50 different imperial laws?" No. Better to let her remember him as he was. 2 dragon guards came for him an hour later. They weren't gentle. Their claws dug into his arms as they marched him through the corridors. Other humans pressed themselves against the walls, their faces pale with fear. Jake was there, his young face twisted with worry. Rachel had tears streaming down her cheeks. Tom tried to give them a reassuring smile, but he wasn't sure it worked. The main bay had been completely transformed. A massive throne had been erected in the center, made of some dark metal that seemed to absorb light. Hundreds of dragons filled the space, their scales gleaming in every color imaginable. Red, gold, green, blue, black. Tom had never seen so many dragons in one place. The air felt thick and hard to breathe, like the weight of all those ancient beings was pressing down on him. And then he saw the Emperor. Tom had never seen a dragon of such size. Emperor Theron was massive, easily 3 times larger than any dragon on the station. His scales were deep crimson, the color of old blood, and they were covered in scars. Battle scars. Hundreds of them, crisscrossing his body like a map of violence. His wings were folded against his back, but even folded they stretched wider than Tom's entire quarters. The Emperor's eyes were like molten gold, ancient and terrible, missing nothing. Just being in Theron's presence made the air feel heavy. Tom's chest tightened, and he had to force himself to keep breathing. This was power. Real, absolute power. And Tom was nothing but a speck of dust in front of it. The guards threw Tom to his knees before the throne. The metal floor was cold and hard. Tom kept his head down, staring at his own reflection in the polished surface. He looked small, scared, human. Then he heard Spark crying out and his head snapped up. A dragon guard was holding Spark, and the little hatchling was squirming desperately trying to break free. Those golden eyes found Tom across the bay, and Spark's cries turned frantic. The sound broke Tom's heart. He tried to stand to go to Spark, but the guard slammed him back down. "So," Emperor Theron's voice rolled across the bay like distant thunder. Every dragon in the room seemed to lean forward, eager to hear what came next. "You are the human who dared touch royal blood." Tom swallowed hard. His throat felt like sandpaper. "Yes, Your Majesty," he managed to say, keeping his voice as steady as he could despite the terror coursing through him. The Emperor's massive head tilted slightly, studying him like he was an interesting insect. "Do you know the punishment for what you have done?" "I can guess," Tom said quietly. A ripple of hisses went through the crowd of dragons. How dare a human speak so casually to the Emperor? But Theron raised one claw and silence fell immediately. "Bring the mother," Theron commanded. The crowd of dragons parted, and an elegant white dragon stepped forward. Lady Sereth was beautiful in the way that predators are beautiful. Graceful, deadly, perfect. Her scales shimmered like fresh snow, and her eyes were ice blue and cold. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned, never been denied. She looked at Spark with pure disgust. This runt was correctly abandoned, Lady Sereth declared, her voice sharp and clear. It was too weak, too small. The bloodline would have been diluted by its survival. I made the proper choice according to our laws and traditions. Tom felt rage bubble up in his chest. Proper choice? They'd thrown a baby away like garbage. He opened his mouth to say something, probably something that would get him killed even faster, but Emperor Theron spoke first. Silence. That single word carried such absolute authority that even Lady Sereth's mouth snapped shut. The Emperor gestured toward the guard holding Spark. Release the hatchling. The guard looked confused but obeyed immediately. Spark dropped to the ground and for a moment just sat there, disoriented. Then those golden eyes found Tom again. What happened next shocked everyone in the bay. Spark's wings spread out, still small and awkward but strong enough. The hatchling launched into the air, flying for the first time with real purpose. It wasn't graceful. Spark wobbled and dipped, nearly crashing twice, but determination kept those wings beating. The little dragon flew across the entire bay, straight toward Tom. Spark landed heavily on Tom's shoulder, nearly knocking him over. The hatchling immediately buried its face against Tom's neck, making small whimpering sounds of relief. Tom's arms came up automatically to steady Spark, to protect the little dragon even though he was the one who needed protection. Then Spark spoke its first word. Father. The voice was small and high-pitched, clearly a child's voice, but it was clear and unmistakable. Every dragon in the bay heard it. The silence that followed was absolute. Tom could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Hatchlings didn't speak for months, sometimes not for a year. And they never, ever called a non-dragon by a familial title. It simply didn't happen. Emperor Theron leaned forward, his massive form moving with surprising grace. Those ancient golden eyes fixed on Tom with an intensity that should have reduced him to ash. Explain yourself, human. Why did you save this creature? Tom looked up at the terrifying Emperor. He thought about lying, about making up some complicated reason that might sound acceptable to dragon ears. But in the end he just told the simple truth. Because Spark was hungry and I had food, Tom said, his voice steady now despite everything. Because Spark was scared and I could offer comfort. Isn't that reason enough? The silence in the bay stretched on and on. Tom could hear his own breathing, could feel Spark's small heartbeat against his chest. Every dragon in the room was staring at him, waiting for Emperor Theron's response. Tom had just admitted to breaking their laws, and he'd done it without apology or excuse. He'd signed his own death warrant. Then Emperor Theron did something nobody expected. He laughed. It started as a low rumble in his chest, then grew into a deep, genuine sound that echoed off the metal walls of the bay. Tom had never heard a dragon laugh before, not like this. It wasn't mocking or cruel. It was real. Human almost. The sound rolled through the space and Tom saw shock on every dragon face around him. Reason enough, Emperor Theron repeated, his voice warm with something Tom couldn't quite identify. Yes, human. More than reason enough. The Emperor rose to his full, terrifying height. His wings spread out, casting shadows across half the bay. Every dragon immediately bowed their heads in respect and fear. Tom stayed on his knees because he wasn't sure his legs would hold him anyway. I was once small too, Emperor Theron said, his voice carrying to every corner of the bay. The smallest of my clutch. My mother looked at me the same way Lady Sereth looks at that hatchling now. With disgust. With disappointment. I was thrown into the cold nursery where weak hatchlings were left to die. Tom's eyes widened. He'd never heard anything like this. Dragons didn't talk about weakness. They certainly didn't admit to it. I survived because a slave saved me, Theron continued. His ancient eyes seemed to be looking into the past, seeing something painful. A being my kind considered worthless. Not even a name, just a number. Slave 47. She found me shivering in the darkness and fed me scraps from her own meager rations. She sang to me in a language I didn't understand. She kept me warm with her own body heat when I was too weak to regulate my temperature. The Emperor's voice grew softer, almost gentle. When I became Emperor, I freed every slave in my territory. I thought that was enough. I thought I had repaid my debt. But I never addressed the root of why they had to save me in the first place. I never questioned why we throw away our young like garbage. Theron's gaze swept across the assembled dragons, and Tom saw some of them flinch under that look. We have forgotten what this human knows instinctively. We have mistaken cruelty for strength. We have convinced ourselves that compassion is weakness. But look at that hatchling. Every eye turned to Spark, who chirped nervously and pressed closer to Tom. That hatchling flew today. Spoke today. Not because of our superior breeding or our ancient traditions, but because one human showed it kindness, showed it love. Those are not weaknesses. They are the foundations of true strength. Tom felt tears prickling his eyes. He'd been prepared to die, but he hadn't been prepared for this. Today, I declare Tom Walker an honorary member of the Imperial family, Emperor Theron announced, his voice ringing with absolute authority. Let it be known across all territories that this human has earned a place among us. Gasps echoed through the bay. Tom's mind went blank. Honorary Imperial family? That wasn't possible. Humans didn't get honored by dragons. They got used by dragons. But Theron wasn't finished. More than this, I established the Keeper Protocol. From this day forward, any being of any species who shows genuine care for our abandoned young will be rewarded and protected. They will not be punished. They will be celebrated. Lady Saratha's elegant head snapped up. This is madness. Her voice was sharp with outrage. They are merely humans. Inferior creatures who... Humans, Emperor Theron interrupted, his voice cutting through hers like a blade, who understand what we have forgotten. Humans who possess something we have lost. The ability to see a suffering child and help without asking what benefit it brings them. The Emperor turned back to Tom and his expression softened. Tom Walker, I offer you a position. First Keeper of the Imperial family. Build sanctuaries for our lost children. Save the ones we have abandoned. Teach us what you know. Show us how to care again. Tom's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. His brain couldn't process what was happening. Finally, he managed to stammer, I'm just a janitor, Your Majesty. I don't know anything about building sanctuaries or teaching dragons. I just saw a hungry baby and fed it. Exactly, Emperor Theron said, and Tom heard approval in that ancient voice. You saw need and responded with compassion. No calculation. No concern for status or law. Just simple, instinctive kindness. That is the wisdom we have lost, Tom Walker. The Emperor leaned closer, his massive head lowering until he was eye level with Tom. You are not just a janitor. You are the being who saw worth where we saw weakness. You loved where we showed only cruelty. That makes you more valuable than 1,000 warriors. More valuable than all the treasures in my empire. Spark chirped proudly from Tom's shoulder as if agreeing with every word. Tom looked around the bay at all the dragon faces staring at him. Some showed respect. Some showed confusion. A few, like Lady Sarath, showed barely contained rage. But they were all looking at him. Really seeing him. For the first time in 20 years, Tom wasn't invisible. He thought about Jake and Rachel somewhere in the crowd. He thought about his daughter on Earth who would get to hear that her father was a hero instead of a criminal. He thought about all the other hatchlings out there, abandoned and dying in the darkness. And Tom realized that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. I'll do it, he said, his voice growing stronger. I'll be your first keeper, Your Majesty. And I'll save every single one of them. Emperor Theron smiled, showing teeth that could tear through steel. But somehow it didn't seem threatening. I know you will, Tom Walker. I know you will. 6 months had passed since that day in the Imperial Bay, and Tom still had trouble believing any of it was real. He stood on the observation deck of Sanctuary Station 1, looking out at what had once been an abandoned mining facility. Now it was home to over 100 dragon hatchlings and 20 human caregivers who had volunteered for the program. The main habitat was massive, with artificial sunlight streaming through reinforced windows. Tom watched as his team moved through the space, each human working with several hatchlings. There was Kevin, a former construction worker, teaching young dragons how to strengthen their wings through play. There was Lisa, a retired teacher, reading stories to a group of fascinated hatchlings who hung on every word. And there was old Walter, a grandfather of 6, rocking a tiny newborn dragon to sleep while humming a lullaby. It was beautiful. It was impossible. It was happening. Father, look. A voice called out and Tom's face split into a huge grin. Spark came swooping down from the upper levels, wings fully extended. The dragon was now the size of a horse, all silver blue scales that caught the light like water. Spark had grown so much, so fast, that sometimes Tom forgot this magnificent creature had once fit in his jacket pocket. I'm watching, kiddo, Tom called back. Spark performed a series of aerial loops, then dove down to where a group of younger hatchlings were struggling with their first flight attempts. Tom watched with pride as Spark demonstrated the movements slowly, encouraging the little ones, correcting their wing positions with gentle nudges. Patient. Kind. Everything that dragon instructors had never been with their young. The data is remarkable, Tom. Tom turned to see Commander Dravik approaching. The old dragon had become his closest advisor, helping bridge the gap between human methods and dragon traditions. Dravik held a tablet displaying charts and graphs. Hatchlings raised with your methods are 30% stronger and 70% more intelligent than those raised traditionally, Dravik continued, his voice filled with wonder. But more importantly, they show zero signs of the aggression disorders that plague our traditionally raised young. No territorial violence. No dominance battles. They actually cooperate. Tom took the tablet and scrolled through the data. It was all there in numbers and percentages, but he didn't need statistics to tell him what he could see with his own eyes. These hatchlings were happy. They were healthy. They were thriving. It's not complicated, Tom said, handing the tablet back. Every child needs to know someone cares about them. Dragon, human, alien doesn't matter. Love is love. Care is care. Dravik nodded slowly. We forgot that. For so long we forgot. Tom's communicator beeped. It was Rachel, video calling from Sanctuary 3 on the other side of the sector. Her face appeared on the screen, and she was smiling wider than Tom had seen in years. Tom, you won't believe this, Rachel said excitedly. We just got approval for Sanctuary 4. They're giving us an entire moon this time. An entire moon. We can house thousands. Tom laughed. Rachel had taken to this work like she was born for it. She'd always had that nurturing instinct, and now she was managing an entire sanctuary station by herself. That's amazing, Rachel. You deserve it. We all deserve it, Rachel corrected. Oh, and Jake says the training program on Earth has 10,000 new applicants this month. 10,000, Tom. People want to help. Jake. Tom smiled thinking about the young man who'd been so scared that first day in the storage closet. Now Jake was running the largest caregiver training facility on Earth, teaching thousands of volunteers how to work with dragon hatchlings. The program had become so popular that people were waiting months for acceptance. Emperor Theron had visited last month, making an unannounced inspection of Sanctuary 1. Tom had been nervous, worried they weren't meeting Imperial standards. But the Emperor had simply walked through the habitat, watching quietly as a young woman named Amy sang Earth lullabies to a clutch of newborn dragons. The ancient dragon had stood there for over an hour, tears streaming down his scarred face. Afterward, Theron had pulled Tom aside. You've given us back something we didn't even know we'd lost, the Emperor had said. Hope. The impact was spreading beyond just the Dragon Empire. The Krillian Collective, a species of insect-like beings from the Outer Rim, had requested human advisors to help with their own young. The Centauran Assembly wanted to establish their own keeper program. Even species that had been enemies of humanity for decades were reaching out, asking how humans had accomplished this miracle. Tom thought back to that night 6 months ago, standing in a dimly lit corridor with a frightened hatchling in his hands. He'd made the simplest choice in the world, to feed a hungry child. That was it. No grand plan. No strategy. Just basic human decency. Rachel appeared at his side, having finished her video call. She was carrying a tiny red hatchling who was shaking with fear, fresh from rescue. Ready for another one? She asked softly. Tom took the frightened creature gently, feeling its rapid heartbeat against his palms. Those scared eyes looked up at him, and Tom felt the same thing he'd felt with Spark. The same thing he'd felt with every hatchling since. Pure, simple compassion. Always, Tom said, cradling the baby dragon close. The sanctuary's artificial sun was setting now, casting golden light through the habitat windows. Tom watched as humans and dragons played together below. Laughing, learning, loving. The galaxy's two most different species, finding common ground in the care of children. Tom realized something profound in that moment. The dragons had conquered 100 worlds with fire and fury. They had built an empire on strength and fear. They had ruled through power alone for thousands of years. But one janitor with a sandwich had conquered that entire empire with simple kindness. And the galaxy would never be the same. Spark landed beside him, now too big to perch on his shoulder. The dragon nuzzled against Tom's side, and Tom reached up to scratch behind Spark's ear ridges, right where the dragon liked it. Love you, father, Spark said. Love you too, kiddo, Tom replied. And in that moment, standing in a sanctuary built on compassion, surrounded by the sound of children playing, Tom Walker, former janitor, now first keeper of the Imperial family, knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The end.